this. Ben Bernanke admitted it in the 60 Minutes interview, which is fiat money. I mean, the local Federal Reserve banks have an account at the Fed, and when the Fed wants to put more money, I'm chuckling because this is almost like a game of Monopoly. When the Fed wants to put more money into the system, it just adds a couple of zeros to their account in the Fed, which is basically like printing money or creating it out of thin air with utter disregard for the consequences of such behavior.
You're exactly right, and a lot of Americans don't know that our currency is not only the currency for the United States, but it is the reserve currency for most of the world. And our allies and our trading partners are increasingly concerned about our huge debt and the spending that we have planned over the next 10 years, and the Federal Reserve printing money that doubled our money supply. And so countries like China that hold our debt are afraid that that money isn't going to be worth anything. So there are a lot of concerns, and so we have got to get a complete audit of the Federal Reserve. Ron Paul is right on this. I mean, he understands our monetary system, and if I've got Bernie Sanders and Jim DeMint in the Senate who are calling for an audit, then, you know, I suspect we're covering the whole political spectrum.
You know, the job of the CIA is to steal secrets and keep secrets. But I think we know more about the CIA than we do the Federal Reserve. There must be some connection between the establishment in both parties and these people that run this unelected central bank that keeps it under the veil of secrecy. And as if to make matters worse, the Obama administration, in its hyper-regulation of the economy, of our economic movements in society, wants the Fed, of all entities, to be the new regulator.
You're right, and I'm concerned. I write a lot about this in my book, Saving Freedom, which has just come out, which hopefully will get Americans engaged and outraged about what's going on here in Washington, because it's not just the Federal Reserve that's out of control, as you know. The government itself is invading all areas of our economy, and we've got to do what we can to stop it.
Senator DeMint, always a pleasure. Good luck. Please fight to get that bill with, let's say, at least 51 co-sponsors. You need 49 more to go.
We'll do it. We'll work it, and thanks for giving it a little play.
Thanks for joining us, Senator DeMint. We appreciate it. What are they afraid of that the Fed, that really might be revealed if the Fed is audited in a way that ordinary folks can understand what's happened there?
You know, who knows? I mean, we're never going to know until we audit them. But I mean, there's people are wondering, do they have some secret offshore accounts? Are they buying treasuries under phantom accounts? So there's actually more monetization going on than we know.
Might they be loaning money to foreign governments and conducting their own foreign policy without us even knowing it?
Who knows? Maybe they're bribing foreign officials to keep dollars as reserve currencies. I mean, you have no idea what these guys are doing.
All right. Before we went to Senator DeMint, and I apologize for the interruption, and I thank you for your patience. You were telling us about an interview you observed in which bankers were making outrageous statements about people that wanted to buy and sell houses, and the government provoking them to do so.
Well, these aren't just bankers. These are Fannie and Freddie, right? They are guaranteeing loans.
Fannie and Freddie bankers.
Right. They're guaranteeing mortgages, and they're guaranteeing them knowing that the borrowers can't afford to pay them back. So obviously, these people could not have borrowed money in the private sector. The only reason they can borrow it is because the government guaranteed it, and the only reason the government guaranteed it is because they knew people were speculating on real estate, and they didn't want to stop them.
We are chatting with Peter Schiff, who's the president of Euro Pacific Capital, and we are joined now by my good friend Tom Woods, who is the author of the runaway bestseller, Meltdown. The book, Tom, that I tell everybody explains better than anyone else and better than anywhere else how we got into the mess we are in at the moment. And Tom is, of course, a senior fellow at the Von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. Tom, I guess you were a little vindicated today. I am thrilled to be with both you and Peter on Freedom Watch, because the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform basically said Schiff and Woods have been right all along. The housing bubble was caused by the government. Are you surprised at that acknowledgement, Tom?
I have to say, Judge, I am a little surprised. Of course, it would have been nicer if they had
included an order form for meltdown and crash proof along with the report, but I'm happy to take the report as is. And I think it's a surprise because typically government wants to put the blame on boogeymen we're taught to hate, speculators, businessmen, lenders, whatever. And in this case, they are, I think, focusing the blame more or less where it belongs. One of the stories that I tell in Meltdown is that Andrew Cuomo, who was the HUD secretary for a time under Bill Clinton, actually came right out and frankly acknowledged at a time when a bank called AccuBank had just been sued successfully with a $2 billion settlement for alleged discrimination in lending. He said, now look, they're going to be forced to make $2 billion in loans that we all know aren't going to be as good. They're going to have more defaults than other loans in the portfolio. They're going to take a hit, but you know that's just the way it is. I mean, it's not like they were coy about this. They came right out and said, yeah, of course there are going to be more defaults. Of course we're going to be causing problems. They frankly acknowledged that. The deficiency in the House report, of course, is the usual deficiency that we see all through American politics, which is, you know, they will focus on some of the bad guys, which is a wonderful step forward. But the chief bad guy who is greasing the skids to make it all possible, of course, Alan Greenspan and the Federal Reserve, is left out of the picture. But thankfully, programs like this one are always anxious to force it back in.
We are chatting with Peter Schiff from Euro Pacific Capital and Tom Woods from the Von Mises Institute. Why did they call Greenspan the maestro? Why was there this aura about him that he was sort of an oracle, and when he spoke, everybody got richer?
Well, you remember, during his tenure, right, nothing really bad happened until it was over, because he was always able to postpone the pain, whether it was Y2K or Russian debt default or the NASDAQ bursting of the NASDAQ bubble or long-term capital management. There was always some quick gimmick fix. There was always easy money, easy Al, they used to call him, cheap credit that Greenspan put. We're now suffering because of all the things he did to keep that artificial economy going. The longer he kept it going, the bigger the imbalances that we built. I'm interested in that report. Did they put any of the blame for the housing bubble on the Fed?
No. There's none of the blame on the housing bubble.
You know, how can the Fed escape blame? Because as much as Fannie and Freddie had to do with it, and the other things that you mentioned, if it wasn't for Alan Greenspan bringing interest rates down to 1%, there never would have been a teaser rate. And without a teaser rate, there would have been no subprime. The whole ability to temporarily afford an expensive mortgage was predicated on that short-term teaser rate, which was a gift from Alan Greenspan.
But, Tom, Peter Schiff is just so right on the mark. Wouldn't these geniuses at Fannie and Freddie, wouldn't the brains behind the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977, wouldn't the people who've sort of been pushing this along, the Barney Franks and the Chris Dodds, realize that if you offer a product below market rate, at some point it has to come back up to market rate, and if the people to whom you've offered it could only afford it at the below market rate, when it rises to its natural rate, they're not going to be able to pay for it anymore?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you can get short-term political gain out of it, and then you have the conviction that when the bust comes, you can blame boogeymen for the bust and exonerate yourself, then you might still go ahead with it. But I think it's useful to recall William Graham Sumner, who was the great Yale University professor, late 19th century, who said that, you know, every time we have a boom and a bust cycle, and we have an asset bubble and it bursts, and people sort of figure it out by the end. They figure out, you know, it was because we flooded the economy with all this cheap money, and that pumped up this bubble, and maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. They sort of seem to get it by the end, but then within a few years, for some reason, regardless of how much it seems like they learned, we start the whole process up again, as if it never even happened.
And yet they're talking this morning about a potential second stimulus. They haven't even spent 10% of the first stimulus.
The problem is, Judge, they don't understand that we're ODing, we're overdosing on stimulus. The stimulus is the problem. We can't have any more stimulus. And, you know, when you're talking about these mortgages, it wasn't just people qualifying. People maxed out on the teaser rates. They were spending 40, 50% of their income at the teaser rate level. There was no room for anything. And in the subprime world, people were maxing out on teaser rates and putting nothing down. I mean, it was an obvious disaster.
Tom, doesn't the federal management of our money and the federal management of housing, through the things you talk about in Meltdown and through what we're talking about